I have to express my gratitude first and foremost. How do I say thank you in so many ways to those of you who have sponsored me, community assessment and support folks, Alberta region folks, Scott, the visionary, Scott Robbins, what a vision. So aren't you a little tired of me, you guys? I know you are. So that's okay. I'll try to tell new stories. So if I tell a story that you've already heard, it's a real possibility because that's what happens when you get old. You start telling the same stories over and over again. And so if that happens, please just, go watch some TV or have a cup of tea and relax. But I'm going to try and make a few points, and then hopefully we can have some wonderful discussion. So thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. Slideshow from beginning. Trauma-informed behavioral supports. So as you all have heard, right, there's so much more going on. There's so much more going on with people than we realize. And those of you, I'm not going to repeat myself, but I do want to give a little bit of the background in terms of what brought me to really understand trauma-informed behavioral planning. So I have to say that on my journey, I often missed the trauma. I often missed what was really going on. And I wrote behavior plans that just put that behavior in isolation and addressed it and missed the bigger picture. And that's a lot of what's informed what I do now. And I'm going to tell some stories. I'm worried about this one story. I think people might have heard it, but hopefully not. But they probably heard it a long time ago. But it's so important to me when it comes to behavior plans because there's a person who taught me so much about what I didn't understand about planning. And I'm going to share my story, and I'll tell it in a different way. But to begin with, I have 3 S's, right, for a successful plan. Simplify. I have seen, and I've supervised people who've written plans like this. Who's going to read a plan like that? I could barely get through it. I would just sign it. Yeah, sure. This is great. That was a mistake. And how many syllables can we use? Here's a test. How many 5-syllable words can we put in one sentence? So my friend, he is a wonderful guy, but he prided himself on writing the most complicated plans that none of us could understand, that I would try to get him to rewrite, and then they would only become more complicated. And what happened was when he had very complex and complicated plans, people would just follow their own. And then what we had was the unwritten behavior plan behind closed doors. And that unwritten plan sometimes turned into parenting, sometimes turned into shaming, and sometimes turned into, oh, well, whatever. But it was not what was intended. So I learned to make a plan as simple as possible. I'm a simple person. I needed to be simple, but to make it clear, make it simple, and as focused on supporting that person as possible, rather than having your analysis. We do functional assessments. We do analyses. We have a hypothesis, but we don't need to have every single detail of that in the plan that we give for the staff. Because we may confuse, it may become confusing, and it may become so convoluted that nothing gets implemented. So number 1, we simplify. Number 2 is support. That we want to give the staff the tools to support that person. So 90% of that plan should be about prevention and enhanced quality of life. How can we support this person in the pursuit of their happiness, in the pursuit of their dreams, in feeling safe, in supporting them in every aspect of a quality life. And then 10% is the intervention that's needed. And when we flip it, and believe me, I've written many plans in the early days that were flipped. When you've got 90% about what to do about the behavior and the intervention, and then 10% about supporting the person, you usually get what you're looking for. And sometimes you'll increase those power struggles and even those behavioral issues when you're full force into intervention. We learned at one agency where I worked, we realized that we had a very involved restraint procedure that had the behavioral procedure, and then we ended up with an entire day of teaching restraints. This was years ago. And what we learned was that after we did that, restraints always increased. And that whole training package ended on restraints, had the most about, crisis intervention, restraining people. When the worst happens, here's the worst, here's what happens, here's what you do. And we actually realized, we started documenting it. And we looked at our statistics and said, wow, restraints spike after every time we do this training and after every refresher, where we had the biggest chunk about restraints in the refresher. And then we said, you know what? We're going to try to get rid of restraints. And it got a lot of pushback at first. No, we can't do that. We're like, no, let's focus on supporting people. Let's take restraints out of the plans and not have restraints as part of a procedure. If someone's running into the road, fine, we've got to hold them back. If there's a crisis, fine. But we've got people trained in what to do, but we're going to focus on support, and we're going to rework our training to have it be mostly about support and helping people and rewarding people, and reinforcers that are contingent and non-contingent, meaning don't have to be earned. So we revamped, and whenever there was a restraint, we would have a meeting and just a meeting with the whole team and try to process. We were very clear about not shaming people. We didn't want to make the staff feel horrible, but we also wanted to process, okay, where did it go wrong? And how can we avoid that restraint? How can we provide support instead of that power struggle, that back and forth, I said do this, no, I'm not going to, I told you you have to, boom, 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 that often leads to a restraint. And when we sat down and we had these meetings, there was always a point at which things turned, right? A point when somebody refused something and the staff insisted, no, you're going to do that. When someone ran and everyone chased them, or when someone threw something and they said, go get that, or whatever. And we said, okay, that's what we have to start addressing. We have to address how to diffuse. And we would talk at these meetings about what could be done. The meetings were so horrible, right? 2 hours of talking about what should have been done, what could have been done, I think the staff got really motivated to just, figure it out and not put hands on people and not get into these power struggles to avoid these meetings. That's called negative reinforcement. So we were able to kind of shift by really, having almost like a root cause analysis process when there was any kind of restraint, when there was anything that led to this power struggle and then that difficulty that wasn't just pure crisis, okay, Ellen is hearing voices and ran into the road. But all the other issues, which often led to those, I said, do this, no, I'm not going to, yes, you are, type power struggles. And we were able to really transform the agency, which was a fairly large agency. And that was oh gosh, that was 15 years ago. And we have not used restraints since. I left that place, but I still supervise the psychology team there. And it's amazing. We've got group counseling going on. We've got individual counseling. We're even doing it by Zoom now. These guys are doing it. I say we, but I don't do any of the work, which is really nice. I just get paid. I'm sorry. It's true though. And we've really changed that atmosphere so that when somebody has a behavioral issue, the first thing we say is what's going on with that person rather than, who was feeding into it or what were they trying to get? So we were able to really transform that place by getting that approach of support. And then finally, we just want to specify. I found that when we're very global with terms and very global in the report and approach the plan, people start to generalize. Everything becomes a bad behavior. Everything becomes, they didn't do what they were supposed to do at 5:00 when it's time to start helping with dinner and they were still watching TV. So we want to be very specific, always targeting exactly what the issue is. So, I had a big issue. I'm sure none of you have plans that target non-compliance anymore, but back in the day, boy, we had plans talking about non-compliance. Who's compliant? I know I'm not compliant. Ask Scott. I can barely even show up, right? I'm working on it. But compliance is not something that really motivates or inspires a human being. It's sometimes a sign that we've broken a spirit when we get full compliance. So we want to be not broad and say we're targeting non-compliance or we're targeting refusal or we're targeting wandering or, things that humans do, right? We're going to have the assumption that people are people. And maybe there's something that's difficult that challenges the staff. We want to get it as specific as we can, drill it down and say, here is the issue. And that's what we want to focus on. So we're looking at simplification. We're looking at a support approach. What does this person need? What is the 90% that will make their life better? What will prevent issues? Prevention, 90%, intervention, 10%. And then when we have that intervention or we have that specific issue, we want to be as specific as possible. And here's my favorite slide. You've seen it before. You've seen it in everything I do, right? It's my second favorite, actually. My first favorite is the triangle with safety, connection, and empowerment. But trauma is the elephant in the room. And the trauma is real. And the trauma does lead to behavioral issues. And so often these behaviors are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that are misunderstood as being behavioral or manipulative. And I'm going to tell you about when I first really realized this. I have stories. All my stories involve me doing something wrong. It's pretty embarrassing. Good thing I have no pride anymore. None of my pride is left. It's all gone to the wind. Because everything I tell you about usually starts with mistakes I made. And this one is a whopper. This is a real whopper. And I know some of you have heard it, but I'm going to tell it in a different way just to entertain you. But because this was a pivotal experience in my life, we had this woman in our day program. So I was hired in one agency. That was actually the agency where we did get rid of the restraints. And I was originally hired there to do the behavior plans and support in the program for dual diagnosis, as well as to oversee psych services. So it was exciting because I was able to do therapy, and I really told everyone, oh, this is what works. This is what we're going to do. And I also had to do the behavior plans. And, we were working with folks with dual diagnosis, and it was exciting for us. We were very proud of ourselves because we understood that people with intellectual disabilities also had mental health issues. Because before that, years ago, there was a thing called diagnostic overshadowing, right? And the minute anyone saw that intellectual disability, or what we used to call MR, that was it. I remember trying to get somebody hospitalized who was in a full-blown manic episode. And I'm talking about this wonderful woman, I'll never forget her, who we'll call her Ellen. And she didn't sleep for 2 weeks straight. And she was babbling and talking and pacing. I mean, this is mania out of the textbook, right? This is out of the textbook. And I bring her to the ER. And we sit there for many hours. And then they tell me that they are going to admit her. They think. And the psychiatrist will be there. And it's about 2 a.m. and I go home. Well, the next morning, I got the angriest phone call from my boss that I've ever gotten. What did you do? What did you do, Ellen? I'm like, I brought her to the ER, and they said, after like at 2 a.m, when we'd been there for hours and hours, they said the psychiatrist was there and they were sure they were going to admit her and I could leave. I'd left. They transferred her from the hospital by ambulance to the institution, Rosewood. That was the institution in Maryland, because the psychiatrist came and he said, oh no, she's not manic. This isn't a bipolar disorder. This isn't, manic depression. That's what we called it back then. She's got an intellectual disability. This is MR. She belongs in Rosewood. And they sent her to Rosewood. And Rosewood called us angrily. What did you do? Why are you sending her back? Because we had taken her out of there maybe 6 or 7 years before then. And that was another one of my jobs. I used to bring people out of the institution. And I was like, oh my goodness, what did they do that for? And they said, well, the psychiatrist said, we don't do this. We don't do people with disabilities. This isn't us. It's a diagnostic overshadowing, right? And that was really important for me because it opened my eyes to what an uphill battle it was to get the mental health community to see the mental health issues of our folks. And we've come a long way. And I was excited to be a part of a program that was serving people with dual diagnosis. But I have to tell you, we still have a long way to go. Because everywhere I go, everywhere I speak, people tell me that they have a hard time trying to find therapists. So now maybe some hospitals will accept our folks. But another reality is that there's a lot of folks sitting in ERs, at least in the States. They have beds in many ERs now. And so they're just in those beds for maybe a week. I knew one guy, 2 weeks last year. He sat for 2 weeks and then they discharged him. So there's no room in the psych ward and we really can't treat him. So it's still going on. But this program was designed for dually diagnosed. And this program, we felt so enlightened, right? So I would do some therapy and then we would have, our behavior plans and we had lots of activities, but we tried to reduce stress and we did what we could. We knew everybody's diagnosis. We kept on top of their meds. We stayed in touch with their psychiatrist, even when we didn't serve them residentially. We were very proud of ourselves. And we had this one woman and her name was Joanne. And Joanne was very, very big, giant. She weighed over 400 pounds. She had the most beautiful face. She was Black and she had these beautiful high cheekbones and big almond eyes. But the rest of her was scarred. She had scars all over her. She had pieces of her ear missing where she had snipped it off with scissors. Right? She had so many self-injurious behaviors and was so destructive towards herself and could be destructive towards others. So our behavior plan targeted self-injurious behavior, aggression, and property destruction, the big ones. And one time she was so upset because the girls in the program, the ladies in the program, refused to include her at their lunch table when she came to sit over there. They said there was no room for her and they were mean to her. She went into the bathroom, started banging on the mirror until she finally broke the glass and took a piece of glass and started cutting herself. That's upsetting, right? I'm sorry, but I bet some of you have seen this. When folks are hurt, when folks are rejected, that they turn it on themselves. And, I've had psychiatrists tell me, oh, it's the endorphins. They just do self-injury for the endorphins. No, I just don't buy that because there's a whole lot of ways to get endorphins. I really believe it's when perceived hate of the self is turned on the self. Yes, I hate myself too. I'll punish myself, I'll hurt myself, and it gives me a sense of relief. So that's what Joanne did. And she would become aggressive towards others too sometimes. So one day there was a guy that kissed her, or tried to. I'm sorry, he didn't actually get to her because she was hard to get to, right? She was very big. But he tried. He said, I want you to be my girlfriend. She grabbed, unfortunately, the gardening tools were out. And because we had a little garden in the back, a little patch. She grabbed that hoe and started chasing him and said, I'm going to kill you. And ran with that hoe. We didn't know she could run like that. And his name was Tyrone. We didn't know he could run either. He ran really fast. He ran down the hall. He ran out the parking lot, ran across to the other parking lot, ran across all the way up to the road, all the way on the other side. We had to take the car to go get him. Actually, we were like, go, run, Tyrone, run. Cheering him on because we didn't want her to hurt him. Right. And we were like, wow, she is so aggressive. She is, you don't get, and we had this behavior plan where she would earn a piece of jewelry, and she liked bracelets, and she would earn a bracelet, and we had it in a box, right? And we're like, you're not going to get your bracelet. You're not going to get your bracelet this week if you do this, Joanne. That did not have a big effect. She kept running. And she couldn't be stopped. So one day, she was very difficult. And I have to tell you, I tried to do therapy with her. I felt like, well, I can help her because I do therapy. I was a little full of myself. I admit that. Well, my approach is therapy first, and that's going to work with her. So this is what I was saying for a little while. But if I walked into that program and I said hello to somebody before I talked to her, she wouldn't talk to me. She'd be like that. You don't care about me anyway. And she'd walk away. I'm not talking to you. Unless she was the only person I talked to, she wouldn't talk to me. And when we were talking, when she did actually talk to me, she would just tell me everything she hated about the program. And she really didn't go into much detail about herself. And I couldn't really penetrate. And then for a lot of the time, she just wouldn't talk to me. She didn't trust me. And I wasn't that good at gaining her trust. So one day, she threw the program manager against the wall. She was so angry, she went storming into her office, knocked her across, and banged her into the wall. And she got bruised, like it hurt. And that program manager was our friend. And we got very angry with Joanne. And we said, she is too dangerous to be in this program. And I am embarrassed to tell you that I was leading the charge on saying we have to discharge her. And we all felt like, yeah, this is too much, and she won't do therapy. I blamed her for my inadequacy as a therapist, not being able to win her trust or penetrate that, just what she needed, the wall, penetrate the wall. I just didn't do a good job. And guess who I blamed? I blamed her. And I was like, well, she just doesn't respond. I'm sorry, but she's not responding to anything. And she's just not, we can't serve her. So we discharged her. We did. And we didn't feel bad about it. The agency that, took her back, and they figured it out. And we went on with many other challenges. And I finally got my license, right? Because I finished my PhD, but I hadn't gotten my license. It takes forever. And I finally got my license. And I said, okay. I was practicing on someone else's license. I wasn't practicing illegally. Just let me say that. And he was like, are you finished yet? I was a real pain in the neck to him. He wasn't making enough money for it to be worth his while. And I finally finished, right? You had to get, oh my God, it was what? 3,400 hours of supervision, some ridiculous amount. And I finished. And the agency did not give me a raise when I then became the licensed person. So I like money. I like it a lot. And the grass is always greener. So I went to this other place, and I went there because they offered me a lot more money, and I was very happy. And I'm kind of bragging, like yes, I've got this. I'll do whatever you need. And they had, several different programs. They had adolescents and they had adults with disabilities. And I said, yeah, I can do whatever is needed. I've been doing this for years. Behavior plans, therapy, staff training. We'll just do this. And they had very involved people. They took folks who were, many of them had forensic involvement. So many of them had come from prison or had come from the Rosewood, which was then at that point then housing just folks who had some forensic involvement. They had been arrested for something or other, right? So it was challenging, and it was great. And so I'm telling them how I can do it all, and they make me this great offer, and I was really excited. My husband was really happy. Oh, you're finally going to make a decent salary. Can we pay off some of these loans? And I went forth. And the first thing I did, you come in your first day and you talk to everybody, go to HR, you're filling out the paperwork. I said, well, there's orientation. They said, but we don't want you to go to orientation. I said, oh, really? I'm not going? I said, just fill out this W-4 and let's get going. Okay. Why is that? And they said, because we have somebody who just broke their staff's arm in 3 places with a vacuum cleaner. Thunk. Ouch. Now that's a bad behavior. Vacuum cleaner assault. So I'm so confident. Oh yeah, no problem. I'll help you with this. So they say, well, we have this person now, and they're in the program, but they're way in the back room, right? They have a 2-on-1, always the 2-on-1, right? 2 staff to 1 person. That never works out well. Usually the 2 just talk to each other and ignore the person. Just my opinion from many years. But so I'm like, sure. And they take me to the back of the very back, right? And there's these 2 big guys, like they look like bouncers. They don't look like staff. They're like, ugh. And one's in front of the door, the other's inside. And guess who it is? It's Joanne. And she has this sweet little voice. And I'm like freaking out. Oh no. I knew my behavior plan didn't work. I knew she really didn't like me. The therapy wasn't good either. And I was just hoping and praying that she didn't know that I was the biggest voice in pushing her out. Hi, Karyn, she said in her sweet little voice. And then I just laid it on thick. Biggest phony you've ever seen in your life. Hey, Joanne, I'm so happy to see you. I missed you. How are ya? Oh, I'm so glad I found you. Right? What a phony. Oh, well, I was scared. I was like, she's going to kill me. She's a lot bigger than I was. But then I realized, like, I'm kind of being confronted with my failure. Like, I've got to figure this out. I said I'm all these things, but now here I am alone with not, the one situation that I really did not succeed in. What do I do? And so I just sat with her day after day, came, spent time, listened. Back then we were doing bubbles in the program, and she would put the bubbles together and I would help her put bubbles together. First we just sat together, and then she started to talk. Then she started to open up, because I finally just listened. I finally listened, and I had no choice. And she started saying some really tough things. She'd been put in that institution in Great Oaks. That was the institution that was in Washington, D.C. She'd been placed there when she was 2 years old, because her family, like so many others back then, were told the best thing you can do is put them in an institution and forget you ever had them when you have a child with a disability. And there she was. And as she grew there, she said the boys started bothering her. And she was sexually abused. And she was also abused by staff. And there were fights with the girls, and it was chaos. It was pure chaos. Back then, they had started teaching kids, because some of the folks that I work with, it was before they had any kind of school. They just had total chaos. Now, at least she was learning. She could write a little bit. She was doing little bits of things, but there was a lot of abuse. And she started to tell me about it. And I thought, oh my God, how can any person lose their family like that? And even now I think of so many of the folks that are born into chaotic situations, and they're taken from their family because maybe there's drug or alcohol abuse, but still they don't get that. How horrible. What is that sense of abandonment? Right? And so there she was, feeling totally abandoned, and then being abused, and then began hurting herself and continued to do that. And gained as much weight as she could so that no one would touch her. Wow. I didn't get the trauma. I didn't get it. I started to see, and so I listened. And then we started talking about staff. Now, let me tell you, doesn't it make sense if we look back on Tyrone kissing her, how upset that made her, right? You're someone that had been abused for so long. And every time we showed her the box, she didn't care about that jewelry. She would fling it down the hall sometimes, like, I don't care. how frustrating for her that we didn't get her. How frustrating for her that I would barely listen to her and I would not just take what she felt was the time and attention she needed. How frustrating for her to be so misunderstood and to feel so bad about herself. So I started to see as I sat with her day after day, and I really started listening. And she told me, as we started to talk about staff, that she'd had some really bad staff in her life. Yes, she did, because this one guy raped her. And others were physically abusive in the institution. She'd gotten hit a few times, more than once, she said. She said, I have to see if people are good or bad staff, because I can't be with bad staff. So her trauma was the center of her life. And what she needed was to protect herself, to be safe. And for her, safety was about being with staff who would not abuse her, who would not sexually or physically abuse her. And getting a bracelet had nothing to do with anything when she was using her behavior to try to protect herself and stay safe. So I was like, oh my goodness. And she said, I've got to find out if staff are good or bad, because I can only have good staff. I can't be with a bad staff. And I said, okay, so what do you do? Well, she had a systematic test. And first, before I tell you about the test, let me tell you what happened with the program manager that she threw against the wall. That program manager was really good at mimicking. And she would make all of us laugh because she would mimic all the people in the program. We'd say, oh, you're so bad, don't do that. But then we'd laugh hysterically because she was so perfect. And she'd tell funny stories, how this one said this to that one. And Joanne heard her mimicking her. And Joanne was so upset. Of course, Shorty felt not cared about. Shorty felt that no one cared at all about her and she was all alone. And then she heard that and she saw red. And that's what she told me. Aw. So Joanne taught me about behavior plans. Because what Joanne said to me, I have to make sure I got good staff. And good staff, I later realized, meant safe staff for her. That's what good staff were. Good staff were safe. And so she said, so I test them, I do. You test them? Oh, yeah. So she had a home where she was served by herself because, it was kind of dangerous to have her with anybody else. So she was served alone. And there was only one TV because that was back in the time when we didn't have a lot of TVs and TVs weren't that cheap. And she said, well, here's the test that I do. When I have new staff, I have to see if they're good staff or bad staff. So I do 3 things. She had a systematic test. 3 things. The first thing, she said, the first thing I do is at 4 o'clock, I got to watch the Powder Puff Girls and the Power Rangers. And if I can't watch the Powder Puff Girls and the Power Rangers, and if staff says, no, we're going to watch Oprah, or we're going to watch the news, that's bad. Back then was the heyday of Oprah, when Oprah had her talk show. And we in Baltimore, we love Oprah because she had her first talk show here, even though she's from Chicago. She started off doing a little tiny show in Baltimore. I went there in person once. Love Oprah. And I'd never met anyone that hated Oprah, but evidently Joanne hated her, really hated her. I don't know why. Maybe it's because Oprah talked about her own sexual abuse. I don't know, but she hated her. And Joanne said, I hate Oprah. I do not want to see Oprah. And when that staff changes the channel and says, no, it's okay, we'll just watch a little bit, and then we end up watching the whole show, that's not good. That's not a good staff. I like cartoons. And if they say something about me being age appropriate, I don't like that. Because back then we always talked about being age appropriate, right? Oh no, let's have age appropriate activities. Well, right now, everybody I know watches cartoons, right? Hey, The Simpsons has been around forever. Please. That was one. She said, and then the next thing is I like to play my games. And if I can play games, then I feel good. I'm happy playing my games. Joanne was so wise. Now we know being engaged in activities is really, really therapeutic if you've had a lot of trauma, because it brings you into the here and now to be active in the moment, right? Not passive, not then remembering the negative, but doing. And engagement is a big piece of that. And so she was very wise. And she said, I have Chutes and Ladders and Candyland and Go Fish. And if I tell them I want to play one of my games and I would like to play a game with them, and if they say no, that's bad. So basically it was strike one and then strike two. Third strike, you're out. What was the third thing? The third thing was that this was really amazing. She knew what she'd been through and that it had affected her. She got on some level her own trauma and how so much of her behavioral stuff and her emotional stuff was based on what she'd been through. She knew. And she said, well, I tell them about myself. I tell them about what happened to me. How wise. She said, but I can't tell them everything. I don't tell them everything. I can't do that. But I tell them a little bit about Great Oaks and the boys. And if they don't listen, that's bad staff. Whoa, how wise of her. She wanted to tell her story and she wanted to connect on that level. And she said, they say they got to do their paperwork or whatever. They got to go. And she knew how to get rid of them. There were more than one people that ended up in the ER. But it wasn't because she was so horrible and a monster and so dangerous. It was that she was so hurt, so wounded, so afraid. And through these years, I'd have to say 99% of the aggression that I've seen is about fear. People trying to protect themselves. Their amygdala flashing, as remember in the basic training, right? Boom, 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 telling you you're in danger. And so what I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you. My eyes were open. It was about her trauma. It was about her trying to stay safe. So what I did was I wrote one of the best behavior plans I've ever written up until that point. It had 3 main points. It was very simple. Number 1, 4:00 every day, watch the Powderpuff Girls and then 4:30 the Power Rangers. No Oprah. Number 2, every day, preferably twice a day, at least once a day, play games with Joanne. And number 3, listen. And we trained all the staff in active listening. And what I had, and I started putting it in every single behavior plan, was talk time morning and afternoon. We had talk time twice a day, and we put it in lots of plans so that everyone knew that they were going to be listened to and they were going to be heard. And we trained the staff in active listening skills, those soft skills. And part of the behavior plan had, coffee time or whatever they enjoyed at 11, and then at in the evening at 6 after dinner. Ask Joanne how her day was. Listen at least 15 minutes twice a day. Doesn't seem like a lot, but made all the difference in the world. Right? And then what we did, got to talk HR into it, worked on that, and talked them into letting Joanne hire her own staff. Because there was one person that Joanne really liked. That person had evidently passed the test. Her name was also Joanne, so we'll call her Joanne too. And Joanne too was just a big-hearted person who loved people and was not afraid of anybody. She was a tough older woman, and she was like, honey, baby, you're going to be fine. You're fine. Oh, don't you worry. Oh, you're getting upset? Don't worry about it. Never showed fear, which I believe when staff become afraid and show visible fear, people become afraid of themselves and they escalate. They don't feel safe. And Joanne communicated positive regard, kindness. You're a good woman. You're a nice person. Just praised her, not necessarily her actions, but praised her character. You're a good person. You're fine. Don't you worry, honey. Don't you worry. And Joanne loved Joanne too. So we made Joanne too the house manager in charge of everything and the point person who would really kind of advise everyone on what they were going to do and how we were going to approach each situation. And Joanne too and Joanne hired staff together. And they did an autobiography of Joanne, and that's where I started doing my books about myself. And right now on the website, KarynHarvey.org, KarynHarvey.org, we have a bunch of workbooks that are free that you can use in conjunction with the behavior plan. And one of them is my book, To Celebrate Me, which is the person can write all about themselves and decorate it and sell it. This is who I am. It's my autobiography, and share it with staff. They train the staff on them. This is who I am. This is what I love. This is what I believe in. We have my book about hope. This is what gives me hope. We have all kinds of workbooks that folks can do that I learned from Joanne. And Joanne hired her own staff with Joanne, and she felt like she was able to train them in who she was and what was important to her. And she went a year and a half with no aggression, maybe 3 or 4 incidents of self-injurious behavior, hardly anything. Had a couple of bad days because everybody does, but no aggression, never hurt a soul, no property destruction. And guess what? She made us jewelry. She started making bracelets for all of us. And our behavior plan was so clear, right? Watch the Powerpuff Girls and Power Rangers, play games, listen to her, listen all the time, and be there for her. And it worked. And I'm sorry to say, this is sad that she passed away. And when she passed away, because she was so overweight, so she was around 40 when she passed. And, also we know now from the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, the ACE study with Kaiser Permanente and the CDC shows us that, people with a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and hers was through the roof, often have very severe health problems and often die prematurely. So, but she was so loved. And we were at her memorial, and I'll never forget it because it was outdoors. And the old staff, a couple of the old staff from the other program came. And then her current staff that she had trained in her and that she had hired were there. And they were all crying and upset, really upset. We were all upset. We loved her. And then the staff from the other program was kind of snickering. They said, they like motioned me over. They were like, they're really upset. And they were kind of saying like, yeah, she was a piece of work, but yeah, we loved her, but yeah, she was really a handful. And I said, no, I'm upset. We're all upset because we saw the real Joanne. And once Joanne was safe, and once we knew what she needed to feel safe, what her triggers were, right? She didn't want anyone threatening her. She didn't want to be ignored. She wanted to be supported. And she didn't want to be feeling unsafe. And what made her feel safe, and once we created that environment, she calmed down. Not only calmed down, she blossomed. She absolutely blossomed. And we saw the real Joanne. So I explained that to them. And then this guy showed up that looked just like her. And he said, that was my sister. And he had been looking for her because she always told us that she had a twin. And you know how yeah, sure, that's cool. But we didn't really believe her or help her pursue it, which maybe we should have. And he said he was her twin. So that's a happy and sad story, but a story where I learned what a behavior program really has to be about and who the source has to be. The informant is the person, not the formula. And the first plan that I had done for her, it was about formula. And I said, reward her with what she likes and withdraw the reward when she has her negative behavior, and teach her about the alternate behavior and tell her this is what we're going to reward when you talk nicely, and we're not going to reward you for attacking others, etc. And I put that formula on top of her rather than listen to her. So I learned that the key to a trauma-informed behavior plan is that listening and watching. And even if people don't verbally use words, we can still see, because of course their behavior communicates. Of course, everything about them is letting us know where they feel safe, where they're okay, and where they don't feel safe, where they feel threatened, and what they're doing to protect themselves. All right. So, sources of trauma for people with intellectual disabilities, of course, we know sexual abuse, physical abuse, bullying. So many folks have been bullied and excluded that is in itself trauma. And again, these repeated institutionalizations. So I like to say, assume trauma. I mean, I don't like to say it because I wish it weren't true, but I say it all the time. So maybe I do like to say it because it's the reality. So we want to, when we're supporting people, we want to look at the fact that there's a reason they're doing what they're doing. And it's often not to just get something. It's to protect themselves. They may perceive themselves as not being safe. So there's a man, and I may have told this story before, but I'll just tell my own story because I think I may have told this one, but about autism. So people with autism, very, very sensitive. So William Stillman, he talks about autism, and he's an autism expert. And he says people with autism are exquisitely sensitive and always intelligent. Assume intelligence. They may not be able to express it, but they're getting it. And he told a story about, and I think I have shared this young woman who, with her sister, the mother remarried, and they moved into a real nice house. And she called up William Stillman, who's the expert on autism, who has autism as well, and said, I heard you can help with behaviors, and my daughter is smearing feces. That's a bad behavior, right? And I'm done with her. I'll have to put her in a home if this keeps up. That's what she told him. And he said, okay, well, I'll come to the house and, meet you all and get to know you all. He comes and he's sitting with them. And they're talking about how horrible this girl is. The girl is maybe about 12 or 13, and her older sister's around 15. And they're talking, she does this and she smears the feces and she knows better. She hasn't done this for 20 years. She knows what she's, not 20 years. She's not 20 years old. Oops. Don't mind me. But, she hasn't done this for a long time. And he has this feeling like something is wrong. Something's wrong. Something's not right. I'm here to tell you, if you ever get that feeling, you got to listen. Every time I've had that feeling was right. But I am sad to say I didn't always. Sometimes I listened to the other people. Like there was one staff, and it later came out that she was horribly abusing this one man. But she was the boss's favorite, staff member of the year. And I said, I don't believe he fell into a sliding door. I don't think that's why he has that black eye. And the boss said, I can't believe you would even suggest that Donna would do something. And so I backed down. And it later came out, there was actually a video taken by another staff with Donna being very abusive. All the times I didn't listen to my instincts are the time I regret. I regret those times. So William Stillman had that bad feeling, and he knew to listen to it. So he said, is it okay if I come back and just sit with the girls? Because the older one would watch the younger one in the afternoons. And the family said, oh, sure. And he came back and he sat with them for a long time. And the older one finally opened up and said, my new dad touches me and is molesting me sexually. So she described it rather than even knowing that term, and was very upset. And then she said, he tried to get my little sister, but that's when she started smearing feces. And guess where she smeared it? Around the doorway. Now that's genius. She was keeping herself safe. So many of the behavioral issues that I've seen are because people feel threatened and their go-to behavior has kept them safe in the past, and they're going to do it again. Or they know, I'll get everybody away from me. Just like Joanne said, I will gain weight and no one will touch me again. So here we are. Then I'm working with this fellow, and I actually was asked to consult, because even though I was working somewhere full time, I was also asked from time to time to consult at different agencies when they had a very difficult behavioral issue. And they had this guy who was also smearing feces. And so I go there and he's smearing it all over. And they said he hasn't done it for a long, long time. When he first came to the program, he did it. He's been fine ever since. Never did it. And he loves cookies. He's like a cookie monster. So we tell him, if you don't smear, we'll give you cookies. But he won't. And we have a behavior plan with rewards. But he won't stop. So of course, always the question is, what happened? What happened to you? So I asked him, what happened? Of course, he didn't use words, but I asked them, what happened? What's going on? And he kind of got that I was trying to talk to him. He's looking at me really intensely, like he wants to tell me something. And then they said, you know what I always do when I'm consulting? I say, I want to find the DSP who that person trusts. And so I asked for the DSP who he trusts. And they said, oh, he left. That was his one-on-one. Clue number one, right? And then they told me, yeah, what happened was in his residence about 6 months before, he'd been horribly abused. A staff had burned him with a pot on his back, a hot pot. And he and his housemates had gone to court, but nothing was done to the staff and they couldn't say anything. And it was just a horrible, horrible abuse and a terrible experience. But then they're telling me this. And then they said, but he was fine here. He's the same person, right? That person is, well, what's different? What's different? So often I say, is there something that changed in their level of safety, in their level of connection, and in their level of empowerment? Is there a change? Well, yeah, his one-on-one that he'd been with for years quit. And so we gave him a new hire who he didn't know, but he's a nice guy. Well, there you go. The last time he got a new staff, that person burned him with a pot. This is the same person who's not dumb. He gets what new staff do, and he doesn't feel safe. So it was so simple. I didn't charge him a dime. I said, well, we're not writing a behavior plan and doing anything. Is there a staff person that he trusts in this program? And they're like, yeah, he also liked Joe, but Joe's with this other guy. I said, well, can you switch them? Can Joe maybe be with this guy? And once they put Joe there, he was not doing that anymore, because that smearing the feces, it was like, don't you dare touch me. He did what he had to do using whatever he could use. Safety soothes people. Safety is important. Positive words strengthen. And we want to replace the power struggles with support. These are elements. In the plan, you should identify what makes that person feel safe, and words that are comforting for that person. I've written out things to say when this guy hears you're cool, we're good, they feel better, right? Terms, words, phrases that help, and how to reduce power struggles. When that power struggle begins, back off. When that person is feeling threatened, here's the signs, right? Replace that with support. Who's the plan for? It's for the staff. It's not to change the person. The more we try to change the person, the more we're going to get into a power struggle. That's just as simple as it gets, right? Because nobody wants somebody else in charge of their behavior. I learned that in my first year of marriage. I thought if I just told my husband everything wrong with him, he'd feel so happy. Not so. He just told me everything wrong with me, and we kind of had a standoff. It's amazing we're still married. Because I learned. Nobody wants someone else to tell them everything that's wrong with them and to be in charge of their behavior. People want to feel support. And so we tell the staff, here's how you can do all the things to redirect, to support, to encourage. We want to reassess intent after that behavior occurs too. So a trauma-based behavior, people will often feel ashamed afterwards, and they'll apologize and apologize and apologize. A deliberate behavior based on, our traditional model where the behavior occurs in order to gain something, because there's an antecedent that's like a green light saying, if you do your behavior now, you're going to be able to get what you need. And, we say there's always those 4 areas: attention, stimulation, communication, and escape. Well, I don't buy that every behavior is communication in a deliberate way. I believe that behaviors communicate, but often that's not the intent. The intent is sometimes just to stay safe. And if we look at that behavior, we can maybe get the message, this person doesn't feel safe, but they're not trying to tell us. They're just trying to protect themselves. So there's a subtle difference. A trauma-based behavior is where that person's trying to protect themselves. A deliberate behavior is where they're trying to get something, and there's a sense of triumph afterwards. Like, yeah, I got what I needed. A sense of assertiveness, a sense of independence. I got it. I did it. Because when people don't have any power, they have to use their behavior to gain power, which is a shame, right? If we could just empower people more, then we don't need this as much. We won't have to have so many behavior plans. But when it's a trauma-based behavior, so we have that trauma-based versus the deliberate. A trauma-based behavior, people often withdraw afterwards. They feel ashamed. They talk about their behavior over and over again. I was bad. I'm sorry. I was bad. Does this ring a bell? Right? We see this. And then sometimes there's an intense neediness. Like, I need to talk to you. I need you. I need you. I need you. And they become more clingy, either very withdrawn or very clingy. I see one or the other. Whereas when it's a deliberate behavioral with act with intent, there's a certain sense of power or empowerment. Like, okay, I got what I needed. Let me try this again a little later because I didn't think I had power and I found some way to get control over my life. Two very different responses. After the behavior occurs, we can often assess it and see, is this person feeling full of shame? Are they shutting down? Are they becoming very needy? And that was a trauma-based behavior versus, was that done with intent? And there's a certain sense of victory behind it. We have both. If I had no power over my life, I'd be using my behavior. I'd be doing all kinds of things. So we want to include in the behavior plan, what are the triggers for that person? What are the set of things that trigger them? So in my second book, which I'm not promoting, I have something called a mental health plan as an alternative. And what I've come to recommend now is that you combine those elements in that mental health plan with your behavior plan, because every region and every state in the States requires certain things. And we do the functional assessment, but also have the mental health issues, like what trauma has been there. You may not know the full trauma history, but you can know if there were multiple placements, if that child or if that person as a child was taken out of their home. What can you tell was traumatic for that person? You want that in the trauma history. What are triggers for that person? What does safety mean to that person? Some people need music to feel safe. Some people need to know that they're going to have certain foods. And sometimes it's the foods the doctor said they shouldn't be eating. Some people need to know that, people will take a walk with them every day. I have one person I'm working with now that says he hates his staff. He's mean because he won't walk with him. And he has a one-on-one and he needs supervision. He said, I need to walk. It makes me feel better. Safety means being able to walk every day because I know I can feel better after my walk. Small things, right? And then the happiness assessment. So what we do is I have this on the website, KarynHarvey.org, and I've talked about it before. You guys are probably so sick of me. You're probably all gone by now. I don't blame you. I said this would be short, and it turns out I'm still as verbose as ever. I just can't be brief, can I? Sorry if you're still here. But in any case, so the happiness assessment, though, is very important to me because we have this in the plan. And in the plan, we say, we do this assessment, which is on the website. It's a very simple assessment, but we look at all 5 levels of happiness: pleasure, engagement, positive relationships, achievement, how we celebrate ourselves, and meaning and purpose. And we assess what is that person's unique happiness. And then we use it with a happiness procedure where we say, this is what this person needs daily, weekly, monthly to be able to be happy, because we all need things to look forward to. And if somebody loves to crochet and we never even knew that's what they like, let's get some yarn and a needle, right? Whatever it is that that person loves that gives them their happiness. Happy people don't put holes in the wall. And we can identify those triggers very clearly and know what makes, looking at all these factors, what makes this person feel safe? What makes them feel connected? And what gives them power over their life? Do they have real choices? Or are their choices fake? And do they feel helpless and out of control? And when a new behavior occurs, we go back to the triangle and say, wait a minute, did something change? Did a staff person change? Did a situation change? Is there a reason they're not feeling safe? Are they more isolated? We're going through that with COVID now. I know it's so tough. And does this person have a sense of power? Do they have just some real choices that they can focus on in their life? Identify what makes them feel safe. I like cats. My husband doesn't want another cat. Don't get me started. Cats make you feel safe. So my friend Jane, our cats both passed away around the same time. They're probably together in cat heaven. But Jane got 2 kittens and she changed so much. She was really sad for a couple of months. And when I just visited her kittens because we both have had our shots. And she's a different person because she feels safe and happy. When she has cats, for some reason, both her parents died, but cats were always in her home. So that's one example, but there are 10,000 things. We have to assess for each person what makes them feel safe and how can we strengthen their relationships? How can they have unpaid friends and connection? How can we improve agency? Where they have control, some sense of control over their life. So important, so critical. We have these tools, using these tools. Our functional assessment is a piece of it, but we want to go broader. One more piece that I think is very important is using that, hopefully, using the happiness assessment. There's also a psychological assessment on the website saying, and let's look at how does that person communicate? What tools are we using to enhance communication? What tools are we using to enable that person not to have to use behavior to communicate? Right? What tools are we using to help that person have connections? Are we training the staff? How are we training the staff? Are we training staff to listen? Are we giving staff the soft tools needed, the soft skills? When we did that training because of Joanne, we trained all the staff in active listening and incidents went down by 85%. I just met with people at our one institution left where we have folks with forensic involvement, it's very small, and they started doing trauma-informed care. For the last year and a half, they've been doing a new hire trauma-informed care training. We did the train the trainer like we're doing in Canada. Incidents have been down by 75%. I feel like it's still not enough, and I want us to even try harder, but 75% is great. So are we teaching staff the things they need? Are we teaching them about people's trauma? Are we training staff in trauma-informed care? Are we giving them listening skills, practice listening skills, active listening, doing those trainings? Motivational interviewing is a wonderful skill to train people in. Are we helping people to assess what makes folks happy and help them to pursue their happiness just like we pursue ours? Or is everything we're doing with them about helping them to not have behaviors? If I tell you not to do something, it's going to become the thing you want to do the most. Every time I go on a diet, I always gain 5 pounds. I had to stop dieting. I lost weight. It worked out better. Because even when I tell myself not to do something, I start doing it. But if we focus on happiness and we support people in what you really love, people get busy enjoying their life. We already know this, but that's why we have the happiness assessment. So these are elements. So on this website, we have these tools. And I also work on in each plan, we have a little section called positive identity development. And that's where the workbooks on this website come in handy, because using those workbooks and helping someone to develop that positive sense of self, we incorporate that in the plan as well. Here's what they like to do. So as I said, we have the 90% of positive activities, prevention, support. And part of that is who that person sees themselves as. And if they see themselves as a person with a behavior problem, that's who they're going to be. And if they see themselves as a person who can make a difference in the world, that's who they're going to be. So how can we support that positive identity, right? How many of you know somebody who once they got a job, who had behavioral issues, but then got a job? And once they got a job, those behaviors changed. Not because of an incentive, but because they saw themselves differently. And that's what I've experienced. And once that identity kicks in, it changes everything. So I worked with this one guy, and we went to, last story, I promise you. We went to back in the day, so this was maybe about 11 years ago. So some of my stories are current. There are a few that are current, but I know a lot of them are way back. So I'll try to come up with some more current ones. I do have some current ones. But this guy, we went and he was somebody that was born with to a mom who abused drugs and alcohol, and he was adopted. He was first placed in foster care and then put up for adoption, and a really wonderful family adopted him. But there was some significant damage there, and he had, some impulse control issues. But then when he hit adolescence, let me first say, he had brothers and sisters who were super achievers, right? Superstars, went to college, got scholarships, did everything right. And so he was the last one, and he was adopted. They were born into the family. And when he hit high school, he just started tearing up. And he became the problem. I'm the problem. He always had some behavioral issues, but he really just started, attacking people and doing stuff. And he got kicked out. Then they put him in an alternative school, and he got kicked out of there. And this was all in Maryland. And when Maryland can't handle you, they send you to New Jersey. So New Jersey is the place we send people. All right, you're going to Jersey. And so he went to the institution in New Jersey. And he just developed the sense that he was the baddest of the bad. We'll call him Jason. And Jason was so bad. And he aged out, and my boss said, you guys got to go up to this institution in New Jersey and look at this guy. And we think we want to serve him because there was a ton of money associated with him. And we went up there and we interviewed him, and he's like, I'm really bad. I'm so bad. Like, no, you can't be bad. You're a person. Tell us about you. Well, I like to do bad things. Okay, that's great. And people think I'm really bad. So he has this whole identity, right? I am a bad, A blank blank, 2 letters that are the same. He was so proud of himself. So we came back to the boss and said, oh, we shouldn't take him. And the boss said, okay, we're taking him. No one ever listened to me. And so we took him, and the state of Maryland thought he was bad too, because the state of Maryland paid for 2 staff. So he had a 2-on-1. And as I said earlier, though, it was always the same. If you had 2-on-1, those 2 would hang out and talk to each other and ignore him. And Jason liked attention, and he liked to be, the center of things. And he wanted everyone to know that he was going to tear up. So they put him in a house by himself. He broke stuff, tore that house up a couple times. And then he was working at a greenhouse, and behind the greenhouse was a lot of woods. And his staff would be hanging out, talking to each other, ignoring Jason. And he'd say, I'm eloping. That was his favorite term, that he was going to elope or run. I'm eloping. And they'd be like, oh, what? And he would run. And he would go home on weekends and visit his dad, who was such a nice guy, and really felt guilty that he had put him in that school, and he had ended up being restrained a lot, and it was horrible. And that's when he even got more violent. I learned about what Jason taught me, suicide by cop, because he called 911. Oh, Dad gave him a cell phone. That was nice, wasn't it? And the first thing he did with the cell phone was call 911. And then he told the cops that he might want to hurt them. And we're like, what are you saying? Where are you going to get shot? And thank God he was white. He would have been killed otherwise. I'm telling you, this is Baltimore 10 years ago. I'm not kidding, right? He's like, well, I was trying to kill myself. It was suicide by cop. So he's always doing something like upping himself, one more. And his dad always gave him things out of guilt. So one time his dad gave him firecrackers. And so he brought them, no one knew it, to the day program, to the greenhouse. And he got the staff to chase him. They're hanging out, talking to each other. And he said, I'm eloping. And he started running into the woods. Somehow he got matches and he lit this firecracker and threw it. I am not kidding. This guy was a genius. That's when I learned that behaviors were actually an art form, performance art. And everyone heard the boom. We all screamed. The one staff said, I've been shot. We ran out there and said, no, it was just a firecracker. Oh, okay. In Baltimore, and we hear a loud noise, you think you were shot. So, and we're like, oh my God, what did you do, Jason? What did you do? It was like, had some firecrackers. He was always very proud afterwards. That's deliberate behavior, right? Because this was his art form. And we had one plan after another. We rewarded him with one big ticket item after another, and nothing worked because the joy of having the power over his life, of the identity of being the bad one, of being the one who could just tear up, that way overrode everything else. That was intrinsically rewarding. And that was his identity. So Jason was a lot of fun. So one day we had a community outing, and at the community outing, we went down to the inner harbor. And so Jason was there, and everybody kind of split apart. And then we were going to get something to eat and eat it outside at the harbor. I wasn't with them, so they were going to do it. But Jason had the cell phone that Dad gave him. And those guys are having a good time. His staff, they're ignoring him, evidently. And Jason sees opportunity. And he goes, I'm eloping. And he runs down an alley. Staff didn't even see him. Then they realize he's gone. And they're chasing. They see him. Oh, they start chasing him. Jason picks up the phone. And let me tell you, the staff were black, right? And Jason's white. Jason picks up the phone, calls 911, says, I'm being chased by 2 black men. 10 years ago, Baltimore City. Oh my God. That's when we learned every staff has to bring their ID on every community outing. No one believed them. Police didn't believe that they were his staff. We had to go get them out. What a day that was. His dad started teaching him to drive. I'm like, oh my God, my car is going to get stolen. Dad was very nice. But then there was this staff called Ty, and Ty was a wonderful guy. And Ty became his house manager. And Ty said, you know what? I've got this house with a couple of guys. I think Jason should live with us. And I was like, oh no, Jason can't live with other people. He'll hurt them. But he didn't listen to me. No one ever did. And they put him in there. And he did better because he finally had some connections and some friends. And actually, Jason never broke a thing in that house, even though he tore his own house up a couple times. Because a piece of that identity was forming. I'm someone's friend. And he hadn't had friends. He'd been everybody's job. But these guys liked him. And they hung out and they watched movies. They had one of those big screen TVs and they watched movies all the time. And then Ty said, I think Jason should come on the job with us. There was this program, and it was very politically incorrect. They had one side of the program where they had everybody working on a contract with disabilities, right? And they were taking apart computers. But the other side of the program, they had people from the outside without disabilities working, and some people with disabilities. It was the high status place to work because the folks with the disabilities were the ones that had a lot of skills. And Ty said, I want Jason to work there. And I was like, I don't think so. So of course he went there and worked there. And then he said, I have a great idea. Jason's got his driver's license and we can just get this little letter on it and he can drive the forklift. I was like, oh, hell no. That's the recipe for disaster. Do you know who this guy is? Do you know what he can do? Have you read his file? Do you remember that behavior plan I trained you in? And he's like, no, I think it's a good idea. And so, of course, they did it because, as I said, they never listened to me. And Jason became the cool guy who drove the forklift. And Jason threw himself into the job because it wasn't him just having a place where we can put him every day. It was him making a difference. It was the identity of someone who worked, and he was the cool guy who drove the forklift. He, within a year, got a job at the Walmart. He got a job at the Walmart. He went every day. He started doing great because he became that person, the person who was a good worker and a good friend. And when his identity changed, that's when the behavior changed. So another piece we want to look at in behavior plans is what fosters that sense of self. What is this person proud about? How do we support them seeing themselves differently? Right? I learned so much from him. And he then, a couple years later, he became the one person on the board of the agency and goes to Annapolis every year to advocate for the legislation that's pro-disability. He's come so far because he saw who he could be. And Ty had so much wisdom. I didn't. I was like, do you know who he is? We can't do this. But Ty said, no, I think I do know who he is. And there's more there. And he believed in him. He gave him opportunities. And that became who Jason was. The good worker. I asked them the other day, do you guys still have a plan for him? Nope, haven't had one for years. Didn't need it. And now he has a girlfriend. Now that's a good story, right? He didn't die. He's alive. He's doing good. Trying to get better. So hopefully I've given you enough different elements to think about how can we integrate these positive pieces into the plan, use the happiness assessment, use a sense of what builds positive identity, identify triggers, identify what helps that person to feel safe and what procedures make them feel safe so we don't have to engage in power struggles, so that person feels complete and total support. And that's trauma-informed behavior plans. Thank you. Okay.
Amazing as always, Karyn. I feel like 2 hours is never quite enough time. Every session that we've done, I felt like I've wanted more. We do have one question
later. I'll pay you. Get it in the mail.
We have one question come in on the Q&A, and so I just want to let everybody know they can start throwing questions into, and I'll read them out. The first question that came in was kind of, what are your thoughts or what are your comments if somebody sort of seems to be constantly seeking out drama or chaos and kind of that kind of whirlwind around them? Could that be connected to trauma? Is that something that would sort of catch your eye?
Yes. In fact, often that goes along with it is that diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, right? And everybody I know with that borderline diagnosis, except for 2 people, had a history of sexual abuse. And they're reenacting it and trying to get that same level of intensity that they experienced in their first very significant adulthood-child relationship, oftentimes. And that means creating crises. I think it's very important to flood people with attention. If you see people that really crave attention, give it to them. and so I have a short story. So this one woman, which you may have heard, I know you guys, I'm saying some of the same stories. I got to write down, I got to start, making an inventory of stories told, stories not told. But this woman used to call 911 all the time, just to create chaos and say, I want to kill myself, and then get to the hospital and all kinds of chaos. and have a nice meal, hang out with the nurses, and then come back. And, the director told me, well, my plan was terrible. And what I had to do was remove her phone. And I didn't want to remove her phone because that just became a dare. And the mother had gotten her the phone, but so they talked the mother into removing the phone, and I didn't agree with it. So she would just go on the neighbor's door and knock, can I use your phone? And the neighbor was, sure, honey. She'd call 911. I want to kill myself. And the ambulance would come. So I finally realized, what is she getting at the hospital, and what is she getting? She would create other crises. She would make a lot of accusations that weren't true constantly. Well, she had been sexually abused. And the one thing she learned to keep herself safe was lying. Lying kept her safe. Creating chaos kept her safe and connected. But that intense need, I think, also comes from a history of sexual abuse. At least that's been my observation. Whatever this person's history is, what I found is, regardless of what creates that intensity of need, if you flood that person with attention, they will get that reassurance that they're going to be heard, they're going to be listened to. So that's what we did with her. I increased my therapy sessions. I had her call me every day at 4:00 and tell me what was going on. And then I made the staff talk to her twice a day, just listening. Just listen twice a day. You're going to have your talk time because we want to hear what's going on with you. Then you're going to call Karyn. You're going to see Karyn twice a week. We just flooded her with as much attention to the point where she got sick of us. But she did stop calling 911. And then we had a party when we realized she had stopped. And we had a party in my office because she's went a whole month. Now that doesn't seem like a long time, but it was for us. She went a month without calling 911. So it was a poor little agency. So we just had cupcakes in the office. But then, she kept going, and we did every month we'd have some celebration. Then she went a whole year, and we got the company credit card, and we went to Red Lobster, and it was really cool. They have the little rolls. I don't know if you got Red Lobster up there. It's really good. Yeah. Love those rolls. And so we all celebrated her. And you know what she did right after that? She called 911. Of course, right? 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So, lower your expectations. Nobody's perfect, and you'll make progress, but it's never going to be perfect. Nobody just goes straight uphill. But what I found is, if anything has a pattern of needing and craving chaos and attention and stuff, you flood that person with attention, and all of a sudden that amygdala calms down. Oh, I'm going to be okay. People are going to listen. I mean, that's what we did with Joanne. We just surrounded her, and we listened to her constantly, and we focused on her. So there wasn't that pain of rejection. And when people have been rejected or abandoned, that pain is also very real and continues onward. So that's been my experience, just kind of doing the opposite of what I used to do. We used to withdraw attention and say, you have to do this to get the attention. And that would just set them off. So we flood them.
And I think that kind of segues nicely into the next questions. So would you be able to speak in more specifics about how you did provide some of that active listening training and did some of that soft skill, like what that actually looked like, so that people could take it more from the staff training into their everyday work?
Sure. And it's not hard to do at all. So, and there's 2 things you can do. One is what I did back in the day, which is we just Googled active listening. We got all the techniques down, and we went over the techniques and had everybody practice. And then I did an exercise that really had a big impact on staff, because I would pair everybody up after we taught them the listening skills. So we teach them, let me go over this, reflection, to say back what someone just said, that it will help them to open up. It's like a little mechanism that helps people to talk more. If you say the last piece of what they just said back to them, we taught them paraphrasing, say what they just heard, kind of to tell them they were listening. Yeah, I heard you had I hear you saying you had a bad day. I hear you saying you're upset with your staff. You say it back to them. We taught those reflection, paraphrasing, showing empathy, like making little empathetic sounds. We practiced all that with those techniques. And then what we did is we would have an exercise. and we pair staff together. And I have always found this exercise to be very effective. One person has to role play a person with the disability that they work with, and the other person is the staff. And that person who's role playing the person with the disability has to talk about a problem that they're having and say, I'm mad, my housemate hit me, or whatever it is that they know. So they're role playing, and then the other person in the pair has to play the staff and listen and process and do everything we taught them: reflect, show empathy, listen, paraphrase. And the minute that staff person starts giving advice and telling them what they should be doing, which is what we so often do with people with disabilities, well, just ignore them or just go tell the staff, blah, 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 blah. The minute they hear that advice, they have to put the hand up. The person playing the person with the disability has to say, talk to the hand, and stop it right there and go back and start again without giving advice or solving the problem. And then when we get to problem solving, the listener has to say, what do you think you should do? And get that person to start saying because people have wisdom. But if we teach them to be dependent on us, they're not going to tap into it. And even with people with minimal words, it's hard to do it with no words, but even with folks that use very few words, you can still do this. And then they switch, right? And then the other staff, who was just the staff person, now role plays a person with a disability, and the other guy listens to them. And what I found from that exercise, as simple as it is that people gain a lot of empathy role playing a person with a disability that they're working with, because they have to be them. And they get the frustration, and they get, this is what's bothering me, this is what's going on, and I'm upset. And having to role play them gives them a sense of empathy. And then they're also practicing the listening skills. So I've used that approach, Google active listening, teach those skills, and then do that. That's one thing. And that's what I've done for years. The second thing is motivational interviewing. And if you can find somebody that's trained in motivational interviewing, it's the same set of skills, and it's a wonderful training. And anybody can get trained in motivational interviewing. I mean, you can train your dog. No, not really. But some dogs are really good at it, though, like. So I believe that, you can do either of those things. And in my first book, I do have some exercises on the listening and listening training. And there's a chapter on training. But it's very simple. You don't even have to read it. You just do it. And once we give the message to staff that listening is an important part of what you're doing, just as important as med administration and bloodborne pathogens and everything else we ask you to do, right there, that changes things, because the trainings are the message we're giving. And I think that helps a lot.
Okay, next one. Can you speak to how some of this might translate into support plans that are specifically developed for children and youth who have experienced trauma?
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for that question. Yeah, these guys, it is all about safety. So I highly recommend, you may have already read this, Bruce Perry's book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And he has such important elements in that book about how children really need to be nurtured who have had a lot of trauma, and they really need that sense of safety. So I highly recommend that you have as much of the trauma history as you can get. We don't always know what we don't know. We may not have, a lot there, but we get as much as we can. You have what the identified triggers are, and then you work to have a trigger-free environment. Or if there are triggers, here's what to do to prevent their big effects. And then you have what helps that person to feel safe, because everybody's sense of safety is different. Right now I'm involved with some families where their children have been very damaged by restraint and seclusion. So traumatizing. And I don't know what it's like in Canada, but still in many, many schools in the States, that's a go-to response. Children are restrained, children are secluded, and they're being highly traumatized by it. So what does a safe learning environment mean? What is safety for that child? What does a safe person look like for that child, or that adolescence? And relationships, how many connections and relationships can there be, like nurturing and healing relationships? How much counseling? I think here's where we really want to engage the mental health community, because these kids who have had trauma need counseling. And I will have a section in the plan that will say, the counseling is required and should be given, and, with this level of frequency. So I think having that kind of trauma-informed view, showing what the triggers are, what makes that kid feel safe, what kind of therapeutic treatment is needed and how it should be supported, and how that environment is best, and what's the best learning environment as well, and how the environment is best handled. Thank you.
And then I think some of the storytelling and the connection to trauma and fecal smearing really hit home with a few people, because we had a couple comments come in. Are there, once you've identified and you know that there is like a trauma component, what are some of the specific strategies or ideas, things to explore in terms of helping to decrease or reduce the need for the fecal smearing?
Yeah. Well, there we go. That's a long road, isn't it? But I think that so much of what I've seen is people are using it to protect themselves sometimes, right? Other times they're bored and to have way more activities going on, to have way more interaction. And sometimes I've seen people having different squeeze toys in the bathroom. I don't know if that always works, but I've seen people do it. Squeezing, having a sensory thing. And I bet our OT person knows lots of cool things to do, because I think OT has to be way more involved in these issues, because so many of these issues, sometimes the behaviors used to stay safe. And those were the stories I told. And that's when we have to look at safety. And sometimes there are sensory issues. And I think we have to also start involving our occupational therapist. Oops, there she is again. But isn't it true? Like there's sensory issues, and there's 100 different reasons why people do things. So if they're doing it as an act of hostility or an act of protection, then we've got to change this environment. This person does not feel safe. And we've got to help them to be more connected to the people supporting them, to feel like they can communicate in other ways. Assistive technology, another thing OTs love. And we have to help this person. But there may also be a sensory issue. And that's when we want to look at the OT and get them involved in doing an assessment and seeing some things that can be done. You didn't know I was going to drag you into this.
No, that's fine. And you're absolutely right. And there could be sensory components to that. What are they getting out of that smearing? Is there a texture issue? Is there a smell issue? Is the warmth an issue? Not to go into a lot of detail about feces, but there's definitely sensory components. And how does that translate into something safer and more appropriate?
And again, I think that segues so nicely into one of the other questions or comments. So it's really rooted in understanding how some of those, symptoms or those behaviors that are related to past trauma, but also understanding the function when there's people who are assuming deliberate intent. How do you sort of blend that trauma-informed approach into a more traditional behavioral template or assessment process? And then how do you sort of bring people along in that change from some of those older, entrenched kind of ideas?
That's a great question, and a very complex question. It has a lot of aspects to it. And that's why I tell the story of Jason, right? So Jason's behaviors were very deliberate. And Jason knew what he was doing, and he got what he wanted. But why? Because that's all he was in his mind. I'm just this bad guy and I'll just do it. I'll take it to the max because I don't have power in my life otherwise. And this is my identity and there's not much else going on for me. And then, he got some friends and then he got a job. So I think a big piece is helping people to have a life, a positive sense of self, an identity, and to really support them. And we don't have to fight back and forth with the old school versus new school approach, because when we're working hard, if you can include the happiness assessment, it helps a lot. I am going to say that. Put that happy. So, right, we have, because Maryland requires a functional assessment. So we have our functional assessment, and then we have the happiness assessment right after that. And then we have our procedure, which includes prevention, which is, as I said, 90%. Then we have the intervention, what to do when the behavior occurs. And then we have the happiness procedure. So that's how we end. Work on that happiness, because that helps a lot. But if we're really having the approach that this person needs to have a positive sense of identity, and that will be a big piece of healing. And that person needs to have a sense of power over their own life that doesn't involve having to have negative behaviors. How else can we empower them? How else can they find ways to have agency in their life? How else can they be engaged in their community, engaged with other people, finding out who they are, just like the rest of us are, And then what naturally happens is people will eventually not even need a behavior plan, because they're going to be working, or they're going to be in relationships. They're going to be moving their life forward with a whole nother level of hope. So I think if we can also be looking at what makes this person's life meaningful, how can they see themselves differently? How can they have that positive sense of self and identity? To me, I've seen that work so many times. And I bet a lot of you have too, with people that have gotten a job, right? Or gotten a role, or even volunteering somewhere, but becoming important to other people. We've been hearing so many stories like that in our Train the Trainer series. So I know good stories are coming to you soon. But, folks that had meaning and found a life and started doing things. And, I think that's the big key. And then we don't, the behaviors will naturally dissipate because people are going to be busy, engaged.
And then I think we probably just have time for one more, because we do really want to make sure that we have a chance to, say goodbye and do all of our closings. So the last question that we're going to have time for is, what thoughts or suggestions do you have when there's entrenchment more at a systems level? So people like the diagnostic overshadowing you were speaking about, where you're trying to find counseling, you're trying to find job support or employment supports or some of those things. And it is just really hard to access because people view the disability as the barrier and don't understand the bigger picture.
Oh, that question makes me want to cry. I feel like crying, because that's the sad truth. That's such a great question. We've got to change this world. I think for me, one thing that I'm doing, like it's a constant struggle. And one thing I'm doing is I am offering trainings to therapists in working with folks with disabilities. So that's a little piece. So I'm training some people in Virginia, and I trained some people in Texas, but I haven't trained anybody in Maryland, where I actually live. So, we're each trying to chip away at the issue. And I think each of us can build a bridge, wherever we can. My friend, her daughter has autism, and her daughter had a horrible trauma. And she realized that her daughter needed therapy. She was sexually abused. And she went to 15 therapists before somebody said that they would work with her, because everybody said, well, I'm not trained in working with people with disabilities. There is no training. You're trained in working with humans, right? So I think the person that she got was someone that was fresh out of school and didn't know what she wasn't trained in, just ready to do anything. But she actually did a wonderful job and really helped her daughter. And so I think, so she made that connection and she made that bridge. And then now that person works with people with disabilities. So it's these one by one efforts that we make. And then, if we can offer trainings, I offer free CEUs with the trainings. It's one way to lure people, but also, just our ongoing effort. I wish I had the bigger answer. I wish psychiatry understood more. There are wonderful psychiatrists out there, but then there's also a lot of folks who mean well, but just see them as the diagnosis of, disability, and that's it, with that diagnostic overshadowing. And, just chipping away as much as we can, wherever we can, until the world finally gets it. I'm glad you get it. I wish I had a better answer. Oh, great. Thank you.